Hey, Whiskey Ringers, welcome to a brand new intro. First off, there are still a few bottles of our single barrel rye finished in Armagnac casks, picked in partnership with This Is My Bourbon podcast. Check out the show notes for links to purchase. Second, I am thrilled to announce that I've joined the Bar Cart Co-op. This group of podcasts and shows has a show or multiple for everyone. I'll talk more about them in the mid-roll. Finally, there are still two $25 spots available on Patreon. These are the last two spots that will ever be open on that tier, so if you've been putting it off, grab your spot today. There are also spots available at the $15 a month level if you want to support but can't quite commit to that $25 tier just yet. There's a spot in supporting for everyone's budget, and I truly thank you all for making this podcast possible. Hey folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. Today we're taking a little bit of a departure from whiskey and going back over to the rum world, which I've been just on a kick recently and really wanted to explore a little more. So to talk about rum with us, I have Kate Perry, not Katie, that's Kate Perry, from La Maison and Velier. There are many different ways that I've heard people pronounce that, but I think that's the closest I'm going to get to being accurate. So I'll go with that. But Kate, welcome on.
That's totally fine. Really, any way is correct. The Italian company Velier, they say Velier. The French side of my company says Velier, so both ways is totally fine. Hi,
And
thanks. Thanks for having me.
absolutely. And the we should start out by saying the we're going to focus mainly on Hampden Estate today
Awesome.
because that's where we kind of got connected through. But we're also going to talk a little bit more about Jamaican rum in general the and I just wanted to point out from the start, La Maison and Velier. It's weird mixing the French and the Italian.
Yeah.
It's a partnership between two very well-known brands, La Maison de Whiskey and Habitation Velier. To make, I said, we're just going to call it LM and V.
LMNV is just fine.
All right, so let's jump right in. So before we get to Hampden Estate, let's talk about your own history, which not too much, don't worry. But
Sure.
so from starting out as a bartender to getting into rums to traveling all over to so you've been in many different shoes. I think all the shoes
All the
for
sh
rum.
yeah.
You've been behind the bar, in front of the bar, in most of the tiers, maybe except production, unless I'm wrong on that. Uh, and both service and consumer side of the industry.
hmm
So from all of that wide ranging experience, I want to start with what do you think makes rum special or really different than other spirits?
Mm. I've been known to say that rum is like the sandwich of the spirit world. Like, you can't tell me that you don't like rum. It's like saying I'm not into sandwiches. It's such a diverse category. There's totally something for everyone. There's the largest just diversity and breadth across category because it's a global spirit. There's differences regionally, there's differences in production methods, there's cultural differences. It's just it's such a huge category that I think that the thing that makes it the most different is that it's just such a huge category. Other spirit categories are so narrow compared to rum. It's like the soccer, the football of the spirit world. It's made all over the place in such different ways. And it really is a spirit that's just so tied to different cultures, different communities, different people, different land, sea, soil, air, different production methods. So I think that yeah, there's just so much diversity that there's really something for everyone to discover, which means that when you're getting into rum, there's all these different rabbit holes that you can jump into. Like, people find their way to the rum world through such an incredible just amount of little pinholes that they go down, and then they realize this big expansive world.
And I completely agree. My introduction to rum, if you will, to real rum,
Yeah.
you know, is it was at an event with Eric Kay of Holmes Key,
Cool.
and of trying rums from around the world. And
Totally.
like you said, it's basically if you can grow sugar, you can make rum.
And you don't even have to grow sugar because most of the world's rum is made from molasses, and there's
That's
a
true.
giant molasses trade. So you can make rum anywhere because most of the world's rum production is made from molasses, either coming from Brazil or Fiji.
Mhm.
Um, and it's just a global commodity that's shipped and traded. So rum from a specific place may not be, actually typically isn't made from molasses from that place, maybe a portion of it. Um, and then they use globally shipped molasses to kind of backfill what they need for their production. But I mean, you can make rum anywhere. Absolutely.
And we've seen with a couple of distillers that we've had on, producers and distillers, that they're in the far north, they're in Sweden, north. They're not growing sugarcane or making molasses up there. They're
No.
they're bringing that in.
Yeah.
But surprisingly, and this keeps surprising me, I think, given the literal worldwide popularity of rum, the worldwide production of it, far more so than whiskey. I think of any of the of any of the whiskey, or sorry, of any of the spirit categories, the closest maybe would be the brandy in terms of just fruit based spirits
I think
would
so.
come
Yeah.
close to it. But despite this huge world of rum, there's really no international regulation about what can be labeled rum, like there is for, let's say, Scotch is this, bourbon is this, cognac. And I know these are sub terminologies, but
Yeah.
the few regulations that do exist around rum are pretty sparse. And so to start at kind of a 30,000 foot view and then focus in on Hampden,
Yeah.
is is there any kind of drive, either regionally or worldwide, to get those similar international regulations for rum?
Yeah. I hear this all the time that, rum is the Wild West, rum has no rules. And I actually disagree with you.
Mhm.
Um, I think that rum has just as many rules as whiskey does because the answer is zero. Like you have to look at rum as a category, like you look at whiskey. So whiskey has no rules, right? But Scotland has rules, Kentucky has rules, Canada might have a couple rules, Ireland has rules, Japan has rules. All of the spirits are the subcategories. The subcategories or the regionality is what gives the rule to whiskey. The category of brandy has no rules. Cognac has a hell of a lot of rules.
Yeah.
Pisco has rules. So it's again the subcategory that has the rules. There's no rules in rum, but Jamaica has a GI. Barbados is working on there. Martinique has a lot of rules. Puerto Rico has rules. Dominican Republic has rules. Cuba has rules. They all have their rules, but it's again the subcategory. They're all just called rum. There is no really other word for it, except for Brazil, where they call it cachaça, or Haiti, where they call it claren, or Cabo Verde, where they call it grogue. So there's tons of rules in rum. The difference is that they're not internationally recognized. So you can go against the rules of the island and their wishes and call it that anyway. And there's really nothing that they can do. Unlike, Scotland, for example, if you bottle Scotch whiskey in Maine, the Scots are going to be pretty upset with you if you're calling it Scotch whiskey because to them it's not. Same thing for Jamaica. If you're bottling Jamaican rum somewhere else and calling it Jamaican rum, the Jamaicans, that's not Jamaican rum. Jamaican rum is aged in Jamaica. It follows their GI. So it's just a difference of perspective, really, on the international market and what is available locally. But rum has tons of rules. The problem is that they're not recognized.
So do you think, so then to rephrase the question, then maybe, is there a concerted effort to get those more internationally recognized? uh, I guess you would have to have the countries obviously working together in the different regionalities.
Not necessarily. I mean, Scotland and bourbon don't work together.
I guess, yeah. I guess that's true. Yeah. I was just thinking like it would, in the interest of having their own GIs be recognized. Like
Mm.
would Jamaica, Barbados, Martinique, all
Yeah,
come
yeah.
forward?
There's a lot of talk about this and a giant heated rabbit hole that your listeners are welcome to jump down on many Facebook and Reddit groups. For me, whatever the local people want, that's it. What the people of Jamaica say their rum is, that's what their rum is. What the people of Barbados say their rum is, that's what it is. If they want to fight to get recognized internationally, I support that. If they don't, I support that too. It comes from their country, they make it. Whatever they want to happen is how the world should move forward.
I would agree with that one. With that, we'll transition to start talking about our star of the day, which is Hampden. And I want to go back to 2009, the
Okay.
olden days,
Yeah.
when the Hussey family bought Hampden Estate on
Yeah.
auction.
Hmm.
And this is really, I mean, it's a fascinating story that can go much more in detail. I'll have a couple of other episodes and resources that I listened to get that history
Yeah.
to add in. But starting from 2009, this is kind of a nadir in the history of the distillery. We've got
Hmm.
it's 1753 as a founding date. It's going all the way
Hmm.
to 2009. It's almost an afterthought in the purchase because they were more interested in the Long Pond sugar factory at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Not related listeners to Long Pond Distillery. Uh, the I guess the question that I had from that was, it seemed like in all these interviews and stories that Jamaicans themselves didn't really know about this distillery or multiple distilleries on Jamaica.
Hmm.
It just wasn't a thing, and it was mainly exported, whether in bulk or independent bottlings, but not really on the island. So I was wondering if you could just kind of walk us through why maybe Jamaican rum wasn't in the limelight in its own home country.
Totally. And I would venture that historically all rum wasn't available in its home country because rum is a product of colonialization. So Europeans arrived to the Caribbean, brought sugarcane there. Sugarcane isn't indigenous to the Caribbean, it was brought there. Um, a whole history of brutality ensued, which is a part of the history of rum. So they brought the sugarcane, they enslaved humans and brought the workforce. After first they enslaved the local people, and the conditions were so hard that almost all of them were killed from the labor. Um, and they exported both sugar and rum. There's this sort of notion that, they were producing sugar in the Caribbean and saw some sugar bubbling and thought, gee whiz, we can make rum, but this isn't true. The Dutch were heavily involved, and the Dutch were um, very, very smart of distillation. They knew exactly what they were doing. So historically, the islands would have had hundreds and hundreds of different distilleries. The distilleries were on land where they grew the sugarcane. The sugarcane was harvested. They would have a small sugar factory where they would produce sugar. And then the byproduct of the sugar was molasses, and this would be turned into rum. Um, Historically, it went from having the hundreds of little parcels of land with their own sugar factory and their own rum distillery, and they introduced centralized sugar factories. So instead of everyone producing their own, they would bring the cane to the centralized sugar factory where it was made, which shut down all the small sugar factories and then shut down the distilleries that were attached. This happened all over the Caribbean except for Haiti, because the Haitians won their independence, kicked the French out. And so when you go to Haiti, there's still over 500 small distilleries still growing their own sugarcane, and taking the fresh juice and making their local spirit, which is called Clairhen. If you go to Guyana, Super interesting history because they actually were thinking ahead. So they knew that they were producing different rums at different distilleries for the British blenders, and that they could still keep producing these if they had the still. So when one distillery would close, they'd take a forklift and take the still, bring it over to the next closest distillery, install it there, keep running, and still producing the same marks or flavor profiles that they had contracts for from the British bulk market, the blenders market. So they kept doing this until all of the stills eventually ended up at DDL, Demerara Distillers Limited, or Diamond Distillery, where they still have the heritage section of the still. So you can go to Guyana and literally see a working tour of the history of distillation. It's absolutely incredible. So this is true of most of the islands, where in the past there would have been hundreds of distilleries in Barbados. Today there's four. Hundreds of distilleries in Martinique. There's nine, I believe. In Jamaica, there's six. So there would have been, I think, 144 distilleries at the height of Jamaican rum. And today there's six left. So Hampden is one of the six. And Hampden has been producing nonstop since 1753 without pause. But the liquid was always a commodity. So for nearly 300 years, the liquid has been produced in Jamaica, and all of it has been shipped off the island. Appleton was the first producer that started bottling their own liquid on island, where the liquid actually stayed on the island. So Jamaicans know Appleton because it's a brand that's been around the longest. Jamaicans didn't know the Worthy Park Distillery or the Hampden Distillery or the Long Pond Distillery because the liquid was always produced and then shipped off as unaged bulk rum over to Europe, for the blenders, the independent bottlers, for confection. In the case of Hampden, still today, over 50% of their production goes to the confection industry. If you think of all of the rum flavoring for rum cake, rum and praline, rum raisin, this comes from Hampden Estate. So yeah, until recently, I mean, it's very similar to the world of Scotch whiskey, where until the 1960s, the distilleries were producing components. The blenders would buy the components, blend it, and produce the brands of rum. So you knew what Johnny Walker was, you knew what Ballantine's was, but you didn't know what Glenlivet was or Macallan was, and it didn't matter, because they weren't producing their own brands until pretty recently. And this is the same in the world of rum, really, where the distilleries were producing components for the blenders. The British Royal Navy has been the largest customer for centuries. And lately, independent bottlers, especially Scotch whiskey independent bottlers, have a love affair with Jamaican rum. I think that there's a lot of similarities there in terms of earthiness and intensity. A lot of Scotch whiskey fans really kind of grasp onto Jamaican rum and understand it more or less immediately. So it's a matter of colonialism, really, is the answer. In 2009, the Hussies bought Hampden Estate and realized, looking over the ledgers, that there were many clients buying Hampden Estate as bulk liquid. So Hampden was always produced in Trelawney, and then all of it was shipped overseas until the Hussies bought the distillery. And they realized that it was used for many things, for confection, for cologne, for the rum blenders market. And they also wanted to keep some of the value of the distillery on the island. So they created the first ever brand of Hampden Estate that was fermented, distilled, bottled, and available from Hampden Estate itself, which was released in 2009, and it was called Rum-Fire. If you've ever seen Rum-Fire before, this is Hampden Estate's first release. In 2010, they started putting down casks for the first time ever at the distillery, ever since 1753. knowing that someday that they would like to release some aged rum. They'd like to have some aged rum, so they started putting it on casks, but there wasn't really much of a plan. They just knew they'd like to have it someday, so they thought, why not? Let's first step is to put down casks. And so it wasn't until 2018 that they released the first ever aged Hampden Estate in the history of Hampden Estate that was aged at the distillery. Obviously, there's independent bottlers who buy unaged bulk rum from the European blenders market. E&A Shear is the most famous. They've been around for 300 years or so. And they were there down on the docks buying bulk rum off of the ships that would come from the Caribbean, bringing barrels of rum. So they've been around for a very long time. And I think most independent bottlers use them still today. They're still the biggest. So it's not till recently that you could buy, Worthy Park in Jamaica, Hampden Estate in Jamaica, Clarendon in Jamaica. Appleton started bottling quite a long time ago. So that's been around for a while. Ray and Nephew is the rum of Jamaica. It's what you rub on the gums of babies. So every Jamaican knows Ray and Nephew. But Hampden's uh, a very old distillery and a very new brand, even though I don't really think Hampden Estate is a brand. Um, it's it's something different.
In doing the research, I always try to think of a comparison just to set my own context for it. And
Sure.
to me, it almost seemed in a way like the MGP of rum, in that MGP's been around since 1847, so Hampden's got 100 years on them for sure. But while some of it was barreled on site and aged there, really they didn't have their own brands, their own products under their own name until 21 or 22. Despite this 150-year plus 175-year history of producing whiskey and spirits for America, for the US, for Canada, wherever you want to go. So that kind of comparison came to me. I know it's not perfect,
Mm,
but
maybe. Um, I mean, it could be.
as you're
Uh,
saying, though, it would that wouldn't apply just to Hampden. That would apply to
that would apply to many.
many,
Yeah,
many.
and still today, I mean, there are. I mean, in Europe, there's so many independent bottlers in the world of rum, because most of it comes through E&A Shear in the Netherlands is right there. Um, in the US, it's just kind of starting out. The independent bottling popularity is rising. There's been a lot of new independent bottlers popping up, and I think that that's probably going to grow. Um, but yeah, I think that, I mean, bulk rum still keeps the lights on at so many distilleries. It's a shared bulk big purchases, while they try to grow their own brands, which is much harder as a small independent Caribbean distillery. So unless you have, international backing, um, it can be really difficult to be an independent distillery. Um, and there are a lot of distilleries with big international backing as well. So a lot of Caribbean distilleries are owned by foreign entities, which can definitely help them sell bottles
For
globally.
sure. So with the just for time, I think I'm gonna skip the what might be an important question, but we'll see. It was going to be about how does Jamaica become known for this funky high ester style of rum.
Yeah.
But
Actually, I like this question.
okay, we go for it.
Yeah. Um, I think that, the funky high ester style of rum is is kind of iconic of Jamaican rum, but it's actually iconic of Trelawney rum. So you wouldn't say, back in the day of the blenders, you wouldn't have said Jamaica rum. It was called Trelawney rum. Like you wouldn't have said French wine, you would say Bordeaux or Burgundy. Like these regionalities meant something. And the home of high ester rum comes from Trelawney and was started at Hampden Estate. So it's actually an important kind of differentiation, not all Jamaica rum is funky. Some of the
No, not at all.
distilleries have multi-column stills, and they're producing very light-bodied liquid. I think that, on a scale from um, one to funky, Hampden Estate is George Clinton. They're
Hmm.
the funkiest of the funky. That is
Hmm.
what they do. And that's what they've done for, 250 years. They created the methods to produce high ester rum for a lot of kind of historical reasons. So there is not funky rum coming from Jamaica as well. But when you're talking about Trelawney rum specifically, you're talking about high ester rum. If you were to draw a horizontal line through the country of Jamaica, the distilleries south were close to the big port of Kingston. And so they were producing high volume. The distillers to the north were quite far away from the major port, but they were producing a high flavor. So the northern distilleries were known for intensity of flavor. And then you have the bigger distilleries in the south of Jamaica, just due to proximity of shipping. So it's really a style that started at Hampden in Trelawney, and it spread to I think 21 or 23 distilleries at the heyday of Trelawney rum. Now there's just two still operating, but this style started at Hampden, and they spread to all these other distilleries that were producing Trelawney rum. And different marks that were then shipped over to Europe. So as a blender, you knew you could buy some more light-bodied spirit, blend in some super funky Jamaican rum, Trelawney rum, and you knew that it would add complexity and round out your spirit and create a lot of dynamic interest or intrigue in your final bottling project. So Hampden created what's called a flavored rum. Not that the rum is flavored, but they would use their rum to flavor other spirits, to add complexity to blends. So I think it's actually a good question because not all Jamaican rum is funky. Maybe if you're comparing it to, multi-column, light-bodied rum from Puerto Rico or Dominican or Cuba or a different style. Yeah, but it's all kind of a sliding scale. But in the world of Hampden, you kind of have to uh, tilt everything towards funky because where they start is kind of where most people tap out.
Exactly. And it fascinated me just looking through is it the geography fits and then just the idea that in all the colonialization that happened and the eventual breaks for independence, but in this entire history of colonialization, then independence and growth, that this one island became known. And to your point, really a part of that island became known for this type of rum, and it didn't seem to spread to other areas. Like there weren't nearby islands trying, as far as I know, like trying to recreate the Jamaican style.
But you have to understand that it was also colonialism. So the British were famous for their navy rum, and so they would source their rum from Guyana, but they wanted that rich Demerara style Guyanese rum as a component of their blend. They would source from Trinidad, which is a lighter, more kind of ethereal style for their blend. They would source from Barbados, which is very you know, balanced, beautiful rum. And then the high note, the funky note would come from Jamaica. So they owned all of the islands and they wanted them all to be different. So it's not that different islands were trying to recreate this style. Different islands were producing their rum to be sold to as their rum and their style to be sold, or to be taken and then later sold to the blenders market overseas. So it's it's not really it's not really like that.
That
And now,
makes a lot more
yeah,
sense, frankly.
yeah, and now
Yeah.
today, when you go to the Caribbean, a hot tip: when you go to the Caribbean, show up on any island and say, I heard that you make the best rum." And they'll say, "Yes, yes, yes, we do. Come with us," because people there are so proud of their rum.
Mm.
it's part of their heritage. It's in their blood. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. Everybody drinks the local rum in the Caribbean, and they're so proud of it. So when you go and you say, I'm here to taste your rum, they're like, yes, come with me.
And with that, the last question I had on the history side of it, until we get into the process, is uh, we keep saying Hampden is known for its high ester content,
Yeah.
uh, and we'll touch on exactly what esters are in a second. But I was listening to, I believe it was the Rumcast with Howard McCalla
Yeah.
as one of the guests, and he said that he's the production manager at Hampden Estate, and
Mhm.
he noted that Europe in particular loves the high ester rums. And I guess from an historical perspective, you have the one side of, well, Europe was getting Jamaican rum and this high ester rum for a long time, either in and of itself or using those higher ester marks to flavor less flavorful spirit.
Mhm.
But in particular, in the last couple of decades, as we've gone through what I hope is a rum renaissance, it seems like Europe is again leading the charge with as you said, so many independent bottlers, Caroni, Habitation Velier, La Maison, and so many others. Why do you think? Is it just like the throwback to what they've always liked, or is there something about the European palate that gravitates to the high esters?
Mm. I think it's a couple of different things. Europe is just much more a mature market than the US. Prohibition really set us behind in a lot
Mm-hmm.
of ways. We still have some catching up to do. You know, because of a couple different reasons, what we've had available in the US. And I would bet that most of your listeners and most people, when you say rum, they think either like really sticky sweet stuff or 151 that you have maybe had to chase down with Coca-Cola in college. And it's typically not an enjoyable thing, the first mention of rum. People tell me all the time, oh, I had 10 spiced rum and cokes in college and I haven't been able to touch rum since. And I said, okay, well, you just told me that you had 10 Coca-Colas in one night. Of course you felt terrible. Not to mention like the rum was maybe filled with additives and other things. Like, yeah, that's not going to be great. So I think that the um, general perception of the category in the US is low quality. And that has changed drastically in the last even 5, 8 years. Totally different scenario today than what it was, when I started in rum, which was 2011. This never happened in Europe. They've always had access to really beautiful spirits. So rum is considered something that's high quality because never it was never really considered something low quality. They didn't have those things, and they didn't have prohibition, which um, just really added a lot of trauma, I think, to our drinking experience in the U.S. And then secondly, they've also had high ester rum and high flavor rum. When you go to France and ask for rum, you get rum agricole from Martinique. This is what everybody drinks. And I think for a lot of people, that's an intensely flavorful rum. For the French, this is what you get rubbed on your gums as a baby. So that the access is just a little bit different. And then the high ester or high flavor rum was created for the European market. Um, Historically, the British owned a lot of islands and a lot of distilleries, and their biggest customer, their biggest client was Germany. They sold a lot of rum to Germany. In 1889, the Germans passed a tax increase that heavily, heavily taxed all imported spirits to Germany because they wanted maybe their population to drink the local spirits, or they wanted to screw over the British. I'm not sure, but the
Probably
British
both. Let's.
overnight, yeah, the British overnight lost their number one customer for rum. So to solve this problem, they invited an agricultural chemist named H. Cousins to go to Hampden, and H. Cousins created the process to make high ester rum. So Hampden produced high ester rums already, but when he showed up on the scene, he produced rums that were just skyrocketed. Thousands and thousands of esters per grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol is the measurement there of of esters. So if you look at the whiskey comparison, if you're talking Scotch whiskey, ppm, the the translation in the ester world is grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol. So they created very, very high ester rum for the German market because they wanted to keep that customer, and they had to sell a lot less of it because it was so potent. So the Germans would buy a lot less of it. So they would also pay less taxes because you pay taxes on the quantity, not the quality. They would bring it to Germany and they would cut it with their local spirit, mostly potato vodka or something like this. And they called it Verschnitt, which means cut. So that you can see old labels of Jamaica rum Verschnitt, cut Jamaican rum, that they would sell in Germany. And this is where the very extreme high ester culture that Hampden created, the reasoning behind it, it was made for this, so that Britain could retain its best customer, the Germans. And so the Germans have always loved high ester rum because it's what they drink, because it would be, all of those flavors would be cut, but they're still very flavorful, flavorful spirits. So I think the Germans are still the number one dunderheads, the number one fans of high ester rum. My colleagues in Europe just say, the Germans are crazy. They just want to drink. They call Hampden's highest ester rum. We call it DOK. They call it DOC. The Germans just want to drink DOC all day long.
So it's going to the process of it. I got to try the DOK, the DOC, as part of the 8 Marks collection.
Yeah.
And it's potent. Like it's
yeah.
You wouldn't start someone out on that unless you really wanted to mess with them. So, we're talking 1,500 to 1,600 grams per hectoliter of alcohol. It's very high.
It's very high, yeah. And it's also not meant for consumption. It was meant as a blending agent or for the confection and cologne industries. It was never meant to be drank on its own. Which, if in that interview as well, that the Rumcast did, my colleague Daniele says, I came to really show people that this isn't something that you're supposed to drink, and instead everybody wants to drink it. So he failed. But I think that, we want to taste extremes, right? We're a curious species on this planet. We want to know things. We want to know what the highest ester rums taste like. And Hampden can produce up to 5, 6, 7,000 esters per grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol. 1,600 is the legal limit that the government caps them at, because again, taxes and money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering why the 1,600 was a cap, but like you said, when in doubt, the answer is usually taxes or money.
Yeah.
So
yeah, government wants to get paid.
Exactly. But the DOK, it's I could handle it. I did enjoy it as an experience, but yeah, definitely more like, in terms of proportions, I would almost consider it somewhere between, in a cocktail, like somewhere between a bitters and an amaro, like a tincture amount, or something like that. You wouldn't make it the only thing unless you're German, maybe.
Then you just drink.
Then you just drink. So so jumping into the esters, which really, we can get into the super scientific part of it, but the easiest way to understand it for this conversation, just for listeners, I'm just gonna say it's flavor and aroma. It's the fruity essences, the esters and aldehydes that get through into the rum. And there's a lot more you can go into it with the organic acids and all of this. Trust me, I would love to, but I have too many questions on Hampden Estate in particular.
I think that the easiest way to understand it is it's not specific to rum. Every spirit everywhere has congeners. Congeners is the umbrella term. Under congeners, you have aldehydes and superior alcohols and esters and other, fatty acids and such. But the esters specifically are the things that give us the flavor, the smell, the aromatics. And I like to think of it as a fingerprint. So there's hundreds and hundreds of different types of esters, and they're, acids that when mixed with the alcohol convert to different uh, different experiences of flavor, really. So when you pick up like, this smells like bananas, that's because there's a type of ester in there that gives us the aroma of bananas. Or this one smells like I don't know, pineapples, or this one smells like mahogany, or this one smells like apples, in any spirit. So the thing that gives you that smell initially, aside the wood, of course, if it's an aged spirit, is coming from esters, one of hundreds of different kinds of esters. So in Jamaica, they measure their spirit in esters, and they're in brackets, because this is how they sold it to the blenders market or to the bulk buyers market. So these distilleries had different marks. I think it's kind of the closest would be like a mash bill in the whiskey world. It's
Yeah,
a
that's what I was
flavor
thinking.
profile. It's not a perfect translation, but more or less. Um, so it's a recipe of production method to arrive to a certain bracket of esters. At Hampden, it starts at about 100 and goes to 1600, the legal limit. Other distilleries might cap out at 300 or 400 or 500, 800 maybe. So Hampden's quite extreme. They, could go much, much higher as well. But they are producing a recipe of raw material and fermentation method to arrive to a certain ester level, and each ester bracket would then have a acronym, typically of the master distiller that produced it, or of the style of rum, and this acronym that relates to the bracket of esters, so 1,000 to 1,100 or 300 to 400 or something like this, has a name to it, and they would sell this to the blenders market. So you knew as a blender that for your blend of rum, you needed, PM from Guyana and HGML from Jamaica, which comes from Hampden, and maybe something else. And you could just buy the different ingredients, blend them together, and it was more or less going to be a consistent blend of flavor.
Yeah, the mash bill is, as I said, there's no perfect comparison, but I mean the mash bill works. I was also thinking of how Canadian whiskey is blended, where you're blending the individual components or the individual grains and then blending into
Mm-hmm.
a profile after that. Um, with For rum and for say funky rum in particular, you're starting with 5 ingredients: molasses, cane juice, which is usually cane juice vinegar, muck, dunder, and water.
At Hampden Estate, yes.
At Hampton, right?
Yes,
Um, most others are not using muck or dunder,
correct. Or cane
um,
vinegar.
or right. So each of those has its role to play, but I think the most important ones, just to touch on, are muck and dunder. So for dunder, seen it described 2 ways. One as an equivalent of kind of stillage in whiskey. It's what's left over after the distillation, and you think of it like a sour mashing product. You'd take the stillage or the dunder, put it into the next batch, and thus you have a whiskey that's already kickstarted with the right bacteria and micro environment that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you have muck, which is the larger term for it, or the larger category, I would say, that includes dunder, but
Mm-hmm.
also has more acids and bacteria that are kickstarting ester generation. Is that correct so far?
Not quite.
Not quite. That's what I
Uh,
thought. Yeah.
yeah, your dunder, yes, dunder is the stuff that's left in your pot still after batch distillation. So you still have kind of a sludgy liquid left over. Most distilleries would, dilute it and dispel it or use it as fertilizer or something like this. At Hampden, nothing is wasted. So at Hampden, you take the stillage or backset or vinasse or whatever it's called, dunder in the Jamaican dialect. You take the dunder and you're pitching it into the fermentation tanks. So it's pumped out of the still into big vats and then it's added into the fermentation, depending, again, everything is to make a precise recipe, or not, nothing's precise, but a specific recipe. Um, so you have a recipe card. You can see it sometimes in Hampden's pictures, and they, and in the mixing hall, they have a chart on the wall, and it's handwritten, sweeten, which is the molasses, the cane vinegar, which is Hampden cuts their cane, juices it, puts it outside in a big vat, and it's allowed to vinegarize. Dunder, muck, and spring water. And the spring water comes from just a couple kilometers up from Hampden. I would argue that this is also super important. It's in the Jamaican GI that the distilleries need to use a local water source. And at Hampden, they're in the cockpit country, which is all limestone. So they have some of the purest water on the planet because it's filtered through so much limestone. So their water for all the use in the distillery comes from the Hampden Dam just up the road from the estate. The cane vinegar, also super important. The dunder, the stuff left in your still. The muck is a little bit different. Their fermentation house is original from 1753, and their vats are chestnut. They have a cooperage on site to make their vats, and they're up to 100 years old. They're very old vats. So they also hold all the yeast and the bacteria and the life, the essence of Hampden Estate in the wood itself. When they're drawing the liquid out of the fermentation vat, the hole, the pipe, the spigot, I guess, is maybe 20 centimeters or so above the floor of the fermentation vat. So when they put the new fermentable wash in, you're already starting with kind of like a mother, like a sourdough mother or a kombucha mother. There's some stuff still in the vat. And so when they put it in, this, you're right, has some of the yeast, the bacteria that makes Hampden ready to kickstart the new fermentation as they're adding in new raw material. But once or twice a year, they clean out all of these vats. They clean out that 20 centimeters or so, and all of this goes into the muck pit, which is a hole underneath the fermentation room. They don't know how deep it is because it's 300 years old or so. They know that it's the length of the fermentation room, but for centuries, they've been putting all of like the waste, I guess, of Hampden. They clean it and everything goes into the muck pit. There's a guy who once an hour or so will aerate the muck pit. It has scaffolding over it so nobody falls in, and it's sort of this like mythical thing where people think like goats have fallen in. I mean, I can barely walk up those tiny little stairs with the holes in the wood. I don't know how a goat ever would. So the muck pit is underneath the fermentation room, and it also contributes to the microbiome of the fermentation house. Because it's open air in there. The vats are all open to the elements. It just has a covering overhead. So the muck is it's a material that is like a super concentrated pit of all of the stuff left in the fermentation vats. So to make like a specific recipe, if Hampden was making DOK, their highest mark, it's a little bit of sweeten or a little bit of molasses, quite a bit of cane vinegar, quite a bit of dunder, and quite a bit of muck, because cane vinegar, dunder, and muck all are very high in acid. They're very, very high in acid. And when the acid interacts with the yeast, It creates alcohol and it creates esters. So esters is alcohol plus acid. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, so lots of different kind of components go into this. It's very complex.
even and thank goodness the that some of those acids get made into esters because my favorite example is just butyric acid. That if you have butyric acid, that smells like baby vomit. It's not
Yeah,
pleasant, but
no,
if you make it into let's say
butyrate.
ethyl butyrate, then you've got pineapple.
Absolutely.
Isoamyl acetate from acetic acid. It's going to be vinegar. Isoamyl acetate, you get bananas, and
Totally. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
transformation. It's it's a caterpillar into butterfly process.
yeah. And in I'm sorry to keep comparing this to the whiskey world. It's just
That's
the
okay.
context that I know.
Yeah,
But
totally.
the in the whiskey world, a lot is made of the distillation process and
Hmm.
how you're transforming this raw ingredient of grain plus yeast and water into uh, the spirit that is then aged. A lot of people will look at young, quote unquote, and I use that term very loosely, but young whiskey as it still tastes very grainy or it still tastes of yeast or fermentation, and thus it's not ready in some
Right.
way. Now, listening to you talk about the rum and to others as well talk about it, I go back to I think it was that same Rumcast episode, and Daniele Biondi was talking about
Mhm.
this, and he was saying that for him it's all about the rum production, it's all about the fermentation and the raw ingredients, and that distillation in the case of rum, particularly at Hampden, is not meant to take out the flavors or to take out mouthfeel or to strip things. It's meant to simply amp up the alcohol content without removing the esters and aldehydes that make the rum great. So in comparing it to, and I should say too, the 8 Marks collection that I've gotten to try is totally unaged at this point.
Mhm.
And so you're getting the at 60% ABV, the rums and the marks that would come off the still
Mhm.
at 60 ABV. And it doesn't taste young or like that. So I guess the question that I had coming out of that was, do you think that rum, again, we're talking good rum and
Mhm.
in Hamden's case, that rum showcases the raw ingredients and the process more so than, let's say, a whiskey?
I think it's different. It depends on the rum, but in the case of Hamden, Hamden is a love letter of fermentation.
Mhm.
Um, in spirit production in general, distillation is a magic process, but you can't create something that wasn't there to begin with. Distillation is a process of separation. Fermentation is a process of creation. So at Hamden, they're producing such a complex fermentation with these 5 raw materials with natural yeast, ambient yeast. There's no selected yeast. With the microbiome of the Hampden Estate fermentation room, with up to a 25-day ferment. Um, you know, a it's a very long involved process to create as much flavor as possible. This is their end goal. High acid raw material, very, very flavorful. Wash distillation is actually the least interesting part of the process. They use double retort pot stills. They have 4 different types. They're beautiful, but the fermentation is the heart of Hampden Estate. The distillation is just the separating out the things that you want to keep from the things that you don't want to keep. It doesn't really matter so much in terms of Hampden's marks because they're all produced on the same equipment. It's the fermentation that makes the difference, and the different proportions of the raw materials. So I think that in the case of flavorful rum, and I would throw Haitian Clahen, I would throw Brazilian Cachaça, I'd throw River Antoine from Grenada, and really just I think rum in general. We're we're kind of lucky because in the world of sugarcane, you can cut the cane, squeeze it, and sugar falls out. Grape spirits, the same, in terms of, or fruit spirits or grape spirits, grapes, the different eau de vies that exist in the world of brandy, which is really a passion of mine. I love these because um, it's to steal the soul of the raw material, to take its spirit, if you will. Um, and when you taste a pear brandy and it tastes like, a juicy pear at the height of season, this is really like the quintessential nature of the fruit. And I think it's similar in rum, where some rums are almost like an eau de vie of sugarcane, especially in the fresh cane world. But you have such a complex raw material that distillation is, as my colleague Daniele said, just amping up the ABV. So you have such a flavorful thing to begin with, and it's not trying to strip that flavor out. We're not using multi-column stills and closed top ferments, and it's a very controlled situation in some cases. This isn't that. This is nature. This is the chaos and beauty and magnificence of nature itself, that creates this complexity. So, I mean, people ask me all the time, like, when you drink rum, what do you drink? And I always prefer unaged rum because I like to taste the raw material. I want to taste the ferment because it's delicious. In other spirits, yeah, you need to put it into a barrel for, sometimes long periods of time, to smooth out those edges. But rum just feels more alive to me, and I always prefer it young, especially if it's coming aged from the Caribbean, because the maturation process is so much different there. I think the comparison to like bourbon and Scotland would be, or Kentucky and Scotland would be similar, where you have much more rapid aging in Kentucky. It's a hot, humid climate. And so you're aging, you drink younger because it takes less time for it to mature versus Scotland, where it's a much more slow, kind of drawn out process. So aged rum from both places are going to taste good, but they're very different of how they get there. And the number on the bottle is very different. So when you're drinking aged rum from the Caribbean, the maturation rate is accelerated, depending on where you are in the Caribbean. There's lots of different microclimates, but you can drink younger rum from the Caribbean. It'll still taste very mature, versus rum that has been brought over to the European climate. So another sort of thing in the world of rum is be careful about the number on the label. It may have something to do with what's in the bottle. It may have nothing to do with what's in the bottle. It all kind of depends.
You got to look at the tropically aged, continentally aged, and know which one's the one you're looking for.
Right. Or the word Solera, which it might mean it has a couple of drops of old rum in it, but maybe not.
Right. That's about all that's probably in there.
Yeah.
Just I think the biggest thing with for me, at least, with Jamaican rum was kind of like you were saying, the comparison with peat, I think, is a really good way to frame it for people, especially whiskey drinkers coming over to rum. And I hope there are more drinkers coming over to rum, because it's a great category. And with peat, you usually, introduce people to like a Talisker or something where it's very low ppms, talking 5 to 10 ppm at most, and then you build up to the Ardbegs, the Lefroigs of the
Totally.
world, and then eventually to the Octomores for the people who want the extremes. Uh,
Yeah.
and with the Hampden, I think the initial marks that you're dealing with, the OMH, the LC,
OWH and LFCH.
LFCH. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, the these first two marks, as you're going up the scale, both do have the esters in there, but it's a much lower concentration. Those have shorter fermentation periods of only about 3 days, as opposed to the 25 for the DOK.
Mhm.
So you're getting the esters, but you're not getting punched in the face with the esters like
Yeah.
you are with the
Yeah.
higher ones.
It's a welcome into the world, not a.
Right, right. And we're talking for those, under 100 really at
Yeah.
esters, grams per hectoliter pure alcohol. So I'm curious, in a production standpoint, when you're going through the distillation, for peat, that you can have a 50 ppm peated malt that goes through the distillation process. And by the time you're finished with it, you're maybe at most at half of that or even lower. So it'll say 50 ppm on the bottle, but you're really getting maybe 5 to 10 in the actual product
Mm.
once it's bottled. With rum, it seems as though the esters that we're dealing with, they're obviously less volatile than the phenols and creosotes, so they're not going to boil off as fast. But at the same time, it seems like more esters just stay in the rum and in the liquid through the distillation. So they don't boil off. They're able to be collected and are less volatile. Is this something where you can say like the we've measured the ester content at the beginning of the process before distillation, we measured it after, and it's pretty similar? Or do you also lose a
Mm.
good amount at the end?
This would probably be a Howard question. In terms of the exact production, I do know that, the OWH and LFCH are newer marks of Hampden, and they were introduced by the Hussies. So LFCH is Lawrence Francis Close Hussey. And they wanted something that, exactly as you said, could kind of draw people into the world of Hampden before we punch you in the face with esters.
Right.
So these lighter marks still have the essential nature of Hampden. They still taste like Hampden Estate, but they aren't these really extreme. There's something that can be enjoyed by everyone to give people just like a welcome or an introduction in. I do know that they are the most difficult rums for Hampden to produce because Hampden is set up for high ester rum. And so
Mhm.
to make these rums, you can't put them next to a fermentation tank making DOK because the esters will go up. So it's difficult for Hampden to have low esters because everything at Hampden is designed to skew towards high. Um, but again, when they are producing the different marks, they have a recipe that they follow. So they know that to produce a range of, 200 to 300 esters, they need to put in X amount of molasses, X amount of cane vinegar, X amount of water, X amount of dunder, and maybe muck. But they will alter their ingredients and proportions of those ingredients to produce lower or higher. So the distillation is really the separation of what was already there to begin with, which was fully intentional to if they're making OWH versus HGML or C Diamond H or DOK or something higher. Does that help answer a bit in terms of
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
exact
And
measurements before after? This is Howard's world.
no worries, no worries. And if you make it out of this interview unscathed, shall we say, if you found you enjoyed yourself, I would love to have Howard on
Yeah,
as well. I love talking about the really really nerdy stuff about this. And that could be a great bonus episode for people too.
totally.
I've got questions about how to get the pH level that low, and you continue the pH that if you're going for a 25-day fermentation, you got to keep the fermentation going for a long time, obviously.
Yeah. Well, it's a two-step process of fermentation. So you have the live fermentation where
Right.
where the yeast is eating the sugar and producing the alcohol and the CO2, and then it slows down and that process stops, and it's what they call a dead wash or a dead wort, where it then just sits, and this is where the bacterial fermentation takes over. So in the really high ester ranges, there's kind of a two-step process to the ferment. And on the I call it the geek sheet, on the
Mhm.
geek sheet that came with your 8 mark set,
Mhm.
there's charts that will tell you for each mark exactly how long the live fermentation is and how long the dead wash sits and rests, until it arrives to the correct you know acid level and Brix level and all the stuff to then be distilled to produce the mark that they had set out to make. I think it's also important to understand at Hampden that they're not just like, I think today we should make some DOK and maybe tomorrow we'll make HGML. And like it's not like this at all. Hampden is really a rum factory. They get orders, they produce to that order, and then they ship out bulk rum for that order. So they have customers waiting, you know, months, years at a time lined up with the orders. So when they set out to make a recipe, it's because they have a client who has ordered this recipe. So it's not like they're just like, yeah, we'll make some of this today and then maybe we'll have a customer for it. Like they're so backed up, they're producing every day to fill orders. Um, and then putting away, a little bit here and there for their own aging. So they just opened their second aging warehouse at the estate. So they're really trying to amp up their own age stock for the aged releases. Um, right now, we're still kind of whatever someone felt like putting down a couple of years ago. The Hampden releases have been a little bit spotty because it's what was available. So that there's no consistency at Hampden Estate because it really is a force of nature. It's a moving, living thing.
I mean, even so, I would say though that the Eight Marks collection is a gift. It's an homage to the nerdier rum drinkers, the
Totally.
ones among us who want, which I think you are, I am, who want to know exactly how long the live fermentation, the dead fermentation was, how long, the percentages of the different esters and aldehydes that come in, which ones are coming in with
Mhm.
each one. And as you said, the geek sheet, I think, is a great way to put it because I looked at it and was like, oh my God, I'm back in college and I love it. And the,
All the geeky
yeah,
information I didn't know I wanted to know.
yeah, I mean, I honestly, I really loved it. It was fantastic. And the only, there's really no comparison for it in the spirits world. I mean, the closest thing I could come to, and this is, I think, quite far away from that, was when Four Roses finally released their like 10 recipes individually, in that
Yeah.
collector's set. But even so, I mean, I was thinking about it. I'm like, that was, I mean, it's 10 individual recipes, but you can also get those individually if you
Mhm.
look for this, private barrelings and private bottlings, I should say, excuse me. So it's, and they resisted it for a long time because of just how much it would cost. It's a smaller market that's going to want this and all this. But
Yeah.
so so for Hamden, where you're still smaller, they're still smaller. They're producing for all these clients, and they're not keeping that much back for themselves. It sounds like,
Yeah. Comparatively, no.
comparatively, right? Why take the time and expense to make this love letter to the nerdy rum drinkers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that Hamden is truly special, not just in the world of rum, but there's nothing like Hamden in the world of spirits. Hamden is, I mean, I don't actually want this to happen because it would make everything more difficult. But to me, Hamden should be like a national historic site. Um, I mean, what they do is incredible. The history there is incredible, and their production. I don't know. There is just nothing else like it. So the Eight Marks. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I don't think of Hamden as a brand, right? Hamden is eight rums. They're very different from each other. They're
Mhm.
a producer of eight rums. Um, and I think each rum is kind of its own brand. So to release um, this eight mark set and give people a chance to taste, the rainbow that is Hampden Estate is really to understand what Hampden Estate does. And you have to kind of think about it maybe a little bit backwards, where most distilleries are set up as um, commercial producers
Mhm.
to create a brand and have a strategy and sell their stock on the global market. And Hampden is the opposite. It was a factory that sourced or that provided other people the ability to make their blends and chocolate and perfume and all these different things. And then it wasn't until 2018 that they created their own bottling that was fermented, distilled, aged, bottled at Hampden Estate by Hampden Estate for the first time. So I think that in the world of whiskey, if you had a 300-year-old distillery that has been producing the most sought after liquid by all of the blenders and bottlers globally for 300 years, and then one day they said, we're going to bottle our own liquid, the whiskey world would turn upside down over it. But that's exactly what happened in rum. I mean,
Mhm.
it's incredible. But it's totally backwards. There is no consistency there because there is no like business strategy to produce a brand, to have a brand strategy for this rum. It's this natural entity. Hampden Estate to me always feels alive. I think when I think of Hampden Estate, I think of it like a Miyazaki film. It's this like kind of steampunk, like clanging, hissing, overgrown with vegetation and peacocks everywhere and butterflies. And it's this like very like kind of like ancestral woodland creature to me. That also happens to produce just some of the most divine spirit.
So just in the last 15 minutes or so, we've got just looking to the future for Hamden. We've seen the A Marks collection come out, which
Yeah.
it seems to have really hit a nerve and in a good way
Yeah.
and hit the market that it was meant to hit. We've got a couple of releases now of the Great House, which is an annual
Mhm.
release. Uh, just before this podcast uh, was recorded, we had also the Pagos
Yeah.
release for this year. So PX and Oloroso sherry finished.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing different experimentations and new. I mean, everything is considered new, and you've only been putting out your own stuff since 2018.
Totally.
Uh, I guess the ones that I was particularly curious about, I was thinking we've now seen an aged LROK and
Mhm.
HLCF bottling.
Mhm.
Putting aside perhaps the DOK mark because that's its own monster in the words
Mhm.
Howard's words. Putting aside that top mark, can we expect to see other aged bottlings of these single marks in the future?
Yeah, it's still kind of a question of, Hamden putting away stock to be aged. It's a very new thing for them. So they have, you know, filled up one warehouse or they're working on it. They just cut the ribbon of the second one late last year. Um, so their stock is still young and their stock is still limited. But as they put away more and more marks, there will be more rum for blends like the Great House, more rums for aged expressions. Um, we just had all of the rums that were supposed to hit around the holidays just arrived now because the world is still hard. But we just had the Great House 2023 hit, which is a blend of different marks of Hampden. The blend of marks changes every year. So every Great House is a different blend. The HLCF Classic, which if there's any Rum-fire fans out there, speaking of delicious unaged rums, that's HLCF. So the HLCF Classic is basically aged Rum-fire. It's the new iteration of the Hampden Overproof. The 8 year is well supplied, so that's sort of people wanting to dip their toe into the world of Jamaica rum or Hampden. The 8 year is a really great kind of safe place to start before you get a punch in the face and a kiss on the cheek. The Pagos, like you said, is aged 100% in sherry cask. So those three, that trifecta just hit the Pagos, the Great House, and the HLCF. So I'm just starting to get DMs and tags on my social media of people around the country getting their bottles. And I think it's a really great kind of follow up to the 8 marks. I didn't plan it to be that way. It was supposed to arrive before, but I'm actually kind of glad it arrived this way because I think people are so much more educated on Hampden Estate now after going through the 8 marks collection, where they really understand, HLCF Classic. Oh, I know what that is. And you can taste it next to each other, the unaged HLCF, maybe a bottle of Rum-fire, and the HLCF Classic. So it's kind of created this cool dynamic nature to the distillery, which I think is really intriguing and fun. Um, in the future, yeah, I don't know. I think there's just endless possibilities at Hampden. I think we've just started to just creak open the door a little bit of what that distillery can do because they can do so much. I know that, it's every day I wake up just feeling absolutely honored to represent Hampden in the US. It's such a privilege, honestly. It really, really is. And to turn other people onto it. And I think that Hampden is a distillery that can really appeal to whiskey drinkers because of its dynamic nature and complexity. A lot of whiskey fans have really embraced the Foursquare Distillery in Barbados.
Mhm.
Um, and Foursquare and Hampden actually made a love baby, a love child called Probitas in the US, Veritas in the rest of the world, which is Foursquare and Hampden blended, which is my favorite cocktail rum out there. It's absolutely exquisite. But I like to liken, Foursquare to classical music and Hampden Estate to jazz. Foursquare is very precise and balanced and exquisite, and Hampden Estate is very chaotic and dynamic and George Clinton, Miles Davis. So I think that there's a lot to discover in the liquid, and from one liquid to another, even. Maybe OWH isn't for you, jump up to HLCF or HGML. They're all very, very different from each other.
And we've gotten confirmation that there will be a second 8 Marks collection.
There will be. I will have
So,
a lot less of it. They sent me 5,000 8 Mark unaged collections, which people were like, "Oh, it's this very limited thing." And I'm like, "No, you can have two. We have 5,000 of them," which I mean, for like normal big brands, isn't very much. For me, that's a lot. I hope I have 5,000 rum nerds in the US. I'd be so happy. Um, but we will have the 1 year arriving. I just had a little bit of a hiccup with the approval process. I don't know how much you guys know about our beautiful TTB, but
they more than we'd like to, let's say that.
yeah, yeah, the TTB does not like the words light and flavored. So when you look at HLCF, Hampden Light Continental Flavored, it posed many problems for me. So I kind of put a stop hold on it to save myself other headaches. And now we're just going back through the process of getting a cola for all of them. This box is really it's extremely expensive to produce. It is extremely difficult. I have to register everything separately in every state and then all together as well. So it's been a total headache, but I think that the outcome of it is absolutely worth it. It's been really, really fun to see people tasting through it. So I'll have much, much less of the aged version, but it should arrive. I don't know. Maybe a summer release sounds nice. We'll see.
Hey, rum in the summer, why not? And
Yeah.
I should just point out too, I mean, of course, it is very expensive to produce and to put in all the work to do that. But from the consumer side, I look at it as thinking it's around 150 for
Yeah.
MSRP. So it's basically the cost of about, well, no, it's the volume, 1600 mils total. It's a little over 2 bottles of 750
Mhm.
mil.
Yeah. So a
So
liter and a half.
you're getting about a little over 2 bottles worth of rum, 8 different experiences, all this information about it,
Yeah.
with opportunities to explore it even more. So for me, that's a hell of a value.
Totally. And the feedback from the pricing on it was, wow, I thought it would be a lot more.
Yeah,
So I'm also happy to offer it at like what I think is a very reasonable price for the experience of it. And the thing that I love best about the 8 Marks, and that I also love best about rum as a category, is that, I feel like a broken record, but I always say that, rum is best when shared with friends. It's a social spirit. There's a little bit of like the spectator culture of the whiskey world is seeping in a little bit. But I love it when I see open bottles, and I love it when someone buys an 8 Mark set and calls three of their friends and they make a night of it,
Mhm.
tasting through and then adding water. and then seeing which one makes the best daiquiri and then making their own blend. And I think it's just such an engaging experience that brings people together. And, we don't need alcohol to survive, right? It's not food, water, shelter. So
Mhm.
it should be a pleasure. And I think that it's a social pleasure. And it's a kid that really encourages that. Um, I think I did an online Zoom tasting with the Austin Rum Society, and they invited people all over the country. So I had this screen filled with people, and almost all of the screens had like two or three people in it. And I just thought that that was so great because they were getting together, they were spending their Tuesday night watching a screen with my face, talking about Hampden, which obviously I love to do, but also just spending time together. And, they were laughing in their screens and pouring in their faces. And it was so lovely to see. And I think that that's the true essential nature of rum, is that it creates community and it brings people together. And I want to see all these bottles opened and shared and brought over to people's houses and invite your friends over. And I don't know. I think that that's something that also kind of makes it unique and I hope continues for the spirit.
And then I'll leave you with one last question, which is,
Please.
when you started as a bartender, started getting into rum in 2011, you said you were stuffing your suitcase with European releases or things you could only find over there, and bringing them back in 2024 now. We've still got a long way to go to catch up in terms of the array and amount of rum that's available, especially the high quality stuff we're talking about. But do you think the corner has been turned and we're on an upswing for
Oh,
rum appreciation?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I opened Rumba in 2012, we opened. So I started working on that project in 2011. And, I didn't know anything about rum. So I went to the Caribbean and I asked people about their rum. And I would travel to these countries and just say, how do you drink this? Show me, and I would be drinking succububbies in an alley in Barbados, and you know, rum and ting, and all these different things, pina coladas in Puerto Rico. And, I just was open to the experience of it. And I wanted to learn from people of that place. Um, and when we opened, it was a struggle to get 200 bottles on the back bar.
Mhm.
It's up here in Washington State, which is, the furthest place possible from the Caribbean. But it was really, really difficult to have a rum selection. And so I would, sort of gray market stuff in. And as I would travel and as I would fall in love with different bottles, the stuff that I just thought was the coolest because it was the most connected to communities and to people, culture, land, soil, all had this little word Velier on the back. And every bottle I just was felt was just really compelling. Also imported by Velier. And so I think like a lot of rum geeks, I was like, what is this Velier? And how do I get more? And one day, Daniele, now my colleague, called me out of the blue and he said, Ciao, Kate, we got your name because we hear that you manage this rum bar in Seattle, Washington, and we'd like to invite you to come to Haiti. You know Haiti, you drink Clahan. Haiti, would you like to come and tour some Clahan distilleries with us and compete representing the US in our Clahan World Championship competition? And I remember just like freezing. And after I hung up the phone, my colleague that I was bartending with said, Kate, who was that? And I said, that was Velier. He said, like your obsession, Velier? I said, yeah. He said, what do they want? He said, they want me to come to Haiti. He's like, for Claren, because I smuggled all the Claren I could onto our shelves, so I knew Claren very well. I think I was, one of very few bars in the country at that point who knew what Claren was. Just me and now my colleague Jan Warren in New York, who is the other crazy person I know who brought himself to Haiti and toured all of our distilleries on his own. So when I had to hire someone, I was like, fantastic, you know everything. You're crazy like us. Come on with us. So I really fell in love with Haiti first, and with just the ethos of the company and wanting to share stories and give a platform and give global access to small producers. Again, it's not a business model that's meant to make money. It's just a business model that's meant to share our passion, share the stories, and share the liquid of beautiful small producers all over the world. And I remember when we were at our launch event in New York in 2019, February 2019, we launched LMNV to the US market beginning in New York. And Daniele came up next to me and said, "Hey, Kate, so we just signed a contract where we'll be the global representation of Hampden Estate." And I got like fish-eyed, like the room kind of went still because Hampden was my favorite distillery. So it was like Christmas, being told that, not only do I get to share the beautiful rums like Carigny and Claren and, different things in the future, but I also would get to share Hampden Estate with the US market. And I still feel today like I did then. It's just Christmas every day that I get to talk about Hampden.
It's a perfect place to end. So, Kate, thank you so much for coming on. Hang out with me for just one more second after I close out. But thank you for coming on, talking about rum, Jamaican rum, about esters, about Hampden Estate, and sharing your excitement, which clearly came through to me. I hope it came through on the audio as well. So
thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.
Absolutely. So this has been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast, maybe the Rum Ring Podcast for this week. Join us next week, and hope to see you there. Cheers. Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeyinmyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey in My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.